You're hired to train your country's top military leaders using only 5 board games. During that time, you'll be in a top secret facility for 3 months. What games will teach these leaders the lessons they need to learn? The Discriminating Gamer is here today to attack the military bunker board game hypothetical, here on Legendary Tactics. Today we're joined by Cody Carlson, also known as the Discriminating Gamer. If you're into history or wargaming, be sure to pay him a visit and subscribe to his channels. One focuses on history and the other on board games and board game reviews. I'll link to those in the description. Without a doubt, he's one of the most prominent and awesome wargaming channels on YouTube. Welcome, Cody.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Awesome. So today we have a challenge for you. We'll lay the groundwork here. We're looking at choosing 5 games for a period of approximately 3 months with 5 military leaders. And we're looking at games that will likely teach tactics, strategy, negotiation, maybe even some less tangible skills, resilience, morality. So we actually were talking about some of our games, and for me, the number one element that I want to teach a military leader in this bunker is something that teaches negotiation and also betrayal. So I've actually chosen diplomacy as my first game. Super harsh teacher. You're going to get stabbed. But I think players learn how to persuade each other. I think you learn the art of fostering alliances, how to strike swiftly and brutally. Maybe these aren't good things to teach a military leader, but that was the first game that came to mind for me.
I was this close to putting diplomacy on the list for the same reasons you said. I think,
really?
I think. Well, I do. I think you got knowing when to strike, but when to compromise, when to make alliances. You could say the same thing about Game of Thrones, the board game.
That's right. Yes,
because it has that same idea there. And let me. I had these in an order I was going to go, but I'm actually going to go out of it because I want to complement what you're saying. There's another game that teaches. It doesn't teach those same things because it doesn't have the element of betrayal per se, but mechanically the way it works is very similar to that. But this game is War Room, which is my favorite game of all time.
Brilliant.
War Room, but why I would put War Room on the list and why I bring it up. Is because I think it's a large strategic game, but really it revolves around resources. And you have to, if you want to build a war machine that's going to go the distance, then you have to kind of break the game down into, kind of operational elements of going for specific targets. Obviously, in Russia, it's very important to try to take out those resources, not only to gain them for yourself, but to deny them to your enemy. And that's kind of where the game really is won or lost, is in these kind of operational decisions and going for resources. But the resources, too, are also the way they function in that game are important because have you played it? Either of you played it?
No, I desperately wish I could. Absolutely. It looks amazing.
It is, because oil in that game is the currency with which you bid for turn order. So oil can be used either to build your war machine, or sometimes you need to go first, and it's a way that you can guarantee that you'll go first. But I would say that. So I'll say War Room, and it has the same mechanics of we write our orders at the same time and reveal them, like diplomacy. That's why I brought it up. But really, I say it's because it's a game about deciding when and where and how to strike for resources, and really incorporating that into building a war machine.
Now, how much of War Room happens off the game board? Like, do you have discussions with other players and you're convincing?
There's heavy discussion. So I played this game a few times now, and I've played a 3-player game once, but mostly I play the full 6-player games. I've been lucky that I've been able to play several full 6-player games. And what's cool about the full 6-player game is when you're writing your orders, you're going, the German, Italian, Japanese players going in one corner, the Soviet, American, British players going in one corner, and you do negotiate amongst yourselves about a grand strategy. And that's too where a lot of those ideas about going for resources come into play, is during those negotiations.
That's amazing. That was actually going to be our third pick too, on the condition that we hadn't played it yet, but it just looked amazing. So we were going to ask you your thoughts. So Nato, do you want to do our second choice?
Sure. My second choice, I figured we needed a game that's going to teach the small unit tactics. And just because I've been playing it recently, I mean, there's many great examples of this, but I was thinking Combat Commander Pacific. You need games that are going to teach soldiers how to take into account physical factors like terrain, line of sight, things like that. But also the intangibles, morale, leadership, and how to coordinate an assault or defense, and also dealing with the randomness of the battlefield, the randomness of those events. So I was thinking, now there's other games like Squad Leader, certainly the older ones as well. But that's what I was thinking. That's what came to mind for me.
That and I haven't played Pacific. I played Europe, but I haven't played Pacific yet, and that's one I'd like to at some point. But I think you're dead on with the idea of, von Clausewitz tells us war is the realm of chance, right? But there's always chance mitigated. It's always chance within a kind of an acceptable parameter of uncertainty. And I think the Combat Commander Europe, at any rate, I think does that very well. And so I think you're onto something.
Yeah. Well, that's good. What have you got for your next one?
So next one I'll bring up is, again, one of my favorite games, probably a top 10 game of all time for me. And this is Friedrich, about the 7 Years' War. Now, combat in this is incredibly abstract, so I'm not talking about it for the combat's sake. But what I think you really get out of this game is maneuver and how to effectively get around an enemy to threaten their supply lines, because they've got to bring a supply train with them if they're out of their own country. And essentially, how you fight is dependent on where you're at any given time. And so I kind of almost look at the abstraction of the combat almost as a terrain. You're playing suits of cards like clubs, diamonds. But I kind of think of that almost as a terrain thing, but also too is just kind of a logistical considerations. And so your maneuver is kind of tied to your ability to fight. And it's just a brilliant game, but there's also a fog of war element there. So you don't know how there's an army there, but you don't know how powerful it is.
Yes,
I think that's another great idea. Have you gentlemen played Friedrich?
I have not. No, I haven't. I don't even know if I've heard of it. Who's the publisher?
In America, it is. I believe it's still Rio Grande Games.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
I believe so. But it's huge in Germany. It's a big game. They have big tournaments of it there. And there's a sister game of it called Maria, which I've owned for years and never gotten to the table. Yeah. But really, I highly recommend it.
That's fantastic. So we'll move to our number 3 pick. Now, for this one, I actually reverse engineered based on what I wanted to teach the general. And the concept I wanted to teach was how to pivot in mid strategy. So if you're in the middle of a conflict and what you're doing isn't working, but you can see a viable strategy on the board, you go for it. So the game I wanted to use for this is PAX Premier 2nd Edition, where I think you can pivot in mid-game. Have you played that one?
You've not?
No. Okay. Yeah. NATO and I haven't played it extensively either, but really, really cool game. Really nice looking. Would you call it a war game, NATO?
Yeah, there's war game elements to it in terms of area control, and but you have to align yourself with the different factions. So it's neat.
And if you feel somebody pulling ahead with their alignment with a faction, you can actually jump in and hitch your horse onto that wagon too. So pretty cool game. What have you got for your number 3?
The next one I'd like to discuss is teaching the importance of logistics and supply. And you get some of that from Frederick, like I mentioned, because part of that is you have to bring a supply train with you. But I think one of the best games I've ever played that teaches just the absolute critical necessity of supply, particularly in modern war, in a mechanized war, is one I actually just played in here not too long ago. This was 1941 Race to Moscow.
Oh, really?
Which I heard good things about Race to the Rhine, but I'd never played it.
Yeah.
But Race to Moscow is good because it you've got units. Of course, you're playing the Germans. There's three players playing the Germans with the different army groups, and you're each trying to beat each other to your objective, right? Your objective cities. And what's interesting is, as you're moving forward, of course, you've got to build your rail lines. You got to make sure your rail lines are working, and then you have to bring up food and ammo, and and oil, and you have to make sure that your armies, because what happens is essentially combat is when your army moves forward, you draw a card, and the card tells you what you're up against and how much of your supplies you have to expend to defeat that army. Okay. And then, of course, you lose that much. You can't carry that much with the army itself, so you're going to lose that much. So as the game is not focused on combat, that's really abstracted, but keeping your army supplied so that they can keep doing that, plus added to the pressure of trying to beat your competitors there and the different army groups forward. That is another great great lesson to be learned, is because modern warfare is really dependent on supply, right?
Yes.
It's keeping, you can have the weapons, but if you don't have the oil, the ammo, the food, they're worthless. They're not doing anything, and it teaches that lesson quite well.
For our next pick, I wanted to kind of shift the focus a little bit, because sometimes in real world combat, these generals are going to be going up against enemies that are fighting very differently from the way they do. And so thinking specifically about Insurgency here in the Coin series, and I think of all the Coin games I've played, I think probably Fire in the Lake would be the most direct kind of translation of the kind of the teachings that we want to pass on to the guys in the bunker. It's managing, obviously coordinating attacks with allies that may have slightly different goals than you do, or sometimes vastly different goals, managing forces with different capabilities, and learning how to balance that short-term gain versus the long-term goal, which I think Coin games teach very well in general.
I'm going to share with you my secret shame. I've never played a Coin game.
Wow. We'll have to fire one up.
It's funny because I've wanted to. I think the idea of them sounds so interesting, but part of me was a little intimidated by it, and I kind of wanted to play with somebody who's played one before, so that I've got that kind of little bridge into it. So I keep waiting for somebody that I know to help me with that experience. But I'd like to play one, certainly.
Yes.
At one point.
But Coin, I think you'd really enjoy Coin with the right crowd. I think it's a really great experience. Isn't that true of so many games though? When you play with the right people, because you can play the greatest game in the world. You can play the greatest game in the world, and if you don't have people that are on the same page as you, it's a slog. Yeah. So what's your next pick?
In warfare, one of the things that you always have to be mindful of is your men. How far can you push them to achieve what you need to achieve, and how far can you take these armies? And there's a series of games that I've just played the first one, and it's one I played this a few times now, and I think I played it for the first time maybe 2 months ago, and I fell in love with the game. But this is Napoleon 1806. And Napoleon 1806 is great because in addition to damage that you take, because you have core, it's Napoleonic, you got core. In addition to the damage that you take when you engage in battles, when you move too far, when you overcome obstacles, you're taking fatigue points. And that fatigue adds up. And if you get too much fatigue, the core is dead, right? And there's ways to manage that, and there's ways to get rid of the fatigue. But it's an important part of the game, and that's something that a lot of war games don't really take into consideration, is just the physical exhaustion, particularly over the course of a few days, that you're asking your men to engage in. And that just, I think you're trying to teach the general a lesson. Well, you got to keep your mind on these men. And you can almost say that fatigue is almost part of that fatigue is morale. You got to keep them, convinced that they can do it. Right.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's a fine system. I want to play the other games in that series, but I haven't had a chance yet. So really, the game fundamentally is waiting out the clock, because if the Prussians can slow Napoleon down enough, then they'll win the game. So that's really kind of what the game is.
Has the particular theater of war impacted your selection of them here? I mean, if you're training these generals, do you want to be thinking across various different time periods, or what was driving your rationale there?
And there's some lessons of war that are timeless. Now, certainly when I talk about 1941, Race to Moscow, that's very much about a mechanized war. But even in any war, except maybe, in caveman days, in any war of any size, you have to keep people supplied. You have to keep them motivated. You have to know their limits, right? And so, no, I was not paying attention to specific theaters or time periods. I'm just picking games that I think would best illustrate certain lessons.
If you're enjoying this video, please take a moment to subscribe and like the video. These engagements really help creators out. So we've had a lot of games that reflect tactics, but we also wanted a game that reflected strategy. So at first we were thinking about a big 4X game, something like Europa Universalis. The Price of Power is the new game that's coming out to teach, a combination of diplomatic, economic, military, political skills, or maybe something like an SPI game like War in the East. And then we threw all of those games out and went with something completely different. Churchill is actually our pick here. But we thought about Versailles, but we think Churchill is a better choice. So we love that there's two sides to the board, and one focuses heavily on the strategy and the negotiation, and the other side of the board is very much about your tactical objectives. So what do you think about this pick, and what's your last pick?
Well, first of all, I think Churchill's a phenomenal game, and it's one of these games. So I was living in Salt Lake till about 2017, and then I moved to Texas to get my PhD. And when I moved, I had to have a massive purge. And one of the games that I purged was Churchill. And
you didn't.
Yeah, I kind of regret it. I keep thinking maybe at some point eventually I'll pick it up again. We'll see. But I think it's a great game. I think it's really, really a clever game. I think it's, like you say, it does a good job of kind of managing the theater of war, while at the same time the heart of the game is this kind of diplomatic struggle over specific issues. And it's a different, what I really like about that game is it conceptualizes, from a game playing standpoint, it conceptualizes the war game in a completely new way, right?
Yes.
That is to say, you've got elements of a straight war game, and you've got elements of a diplomatic game that almost kind of borrows from like a Twilight Struggle, right? Yeah. Which again, I'm studying Twilight Struggle because it's a phenomenal game. And the way it puts it together, I think it's Mark Herman, right? Mark Herman designed that one.
Mark Herman designed it, yes.
I think he just knocked it out of the park. But I will say this: having said all that about Churchill, I must confess, I think I prefer Versailles 1919.
Yes.
Because I think Versailles 1919, it does a lot of those same things. It kind of changes and mixes up the genre a little bit. But I don't know. I just fell in love with Versailles 1919. I just thought I liked how you can like steal other people during the uprisings, whenever you can steal other people's score cards, and it felt kind of nasty in that way, and to take that, and I like that. But anyway, I could go on and on and on, but I'm not going to. Let me go ahead and talk about my last one here. So for this last one, I wanted to take a look at a more conventional war game. I wanted to take a look at a more conventional approach to wargaming and what lessons you get from that. So the game I chose is a game that came out, I think, just last year from Worthington, and this is 1944 Battle of the Bulge. Ooh. And this game, what I like about this game is it is a hex and counter game. Hexes are a little bit bigger than typical hexes, but it's a typical hex and counter war game. But this one, I think, does such a phenomenal job of emphasizing ideas like terrain. And you've only got so many narrow roads. It's Battle of the Bulge, obviously, 1944. The Germans only have so many avenues of advance, so the Allies can see where they're coming. But how you spend your resources, you got this like resource track, essentially your action points or whatever, and how you spend those then becomes incredibly critical. How much of an effort are you going to make on one side of the board at the expense of another, or one unit at the expense of another, and it brings in that kind of what you think of with a hex and counter game. It brings that, as I say, but it does it very, very well with regard to maneuver.
When I saw the map to that game, I immediately thought No Retreat, the GMT. It just visually, it just struck me as, pick any one of the No Retreat games. It just struck me visually as being very similar. Like the hexes, the hexes are nice and big. It doesn't strike me as a game that has a high counter density either. So I'm wondering if it's maybe inspired a bit from that.
It probably was. I should point out too is a game. What I like about it is it's not a terribly long game. It's long enough that it bites, but it's not going to take you 2 or 3 nights to do. And it's fairly simple, and you can also mix it up with different little scenarios in it and stuff. So I really thought it was a fun game, but I think it teaches some of those basic lessons of moving an army under combat conditions, trying to move forward or defend against that.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Cody, we have to say you've got some amazing picks here. We really appreciate the time you took to join us today and to share those. I love how many of these games I haven't heard of. NATO, you've got some work for you now to go and learn and play all these games.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us, Cody.
Hey, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. Let me know if you ever want to do something like this again. I'd be more than happy to join you.
Yeah.
Brilliant. It was a blast having you on the channel. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Let us know which of our picks are the best, and if we've missed any games. You can also check out our Desert Island, Lost in Space, and Zombie Apocalypse scenarios if you like these hypotheticals. Thanks so much for your time.